A Quiet Place Day One is the third entry in the A Quiet Place franchise, and after a film no one expected a sequel to, this world has been surprisingly great thus far. So today I want to rank all three films from the worst to the best, and also talk about where this franchise could be heading in the future. Before we get into it, over 90% of you guys who watch these videos aren't subscribed, so if you don't want to miss out on any more of my reviews or reactions, hit that button. But without wasting any more time, let's get into it. For starters, let me know your ranking of all three films in the comments down below, but in third place for me is A Quiet Place Day One at about a 6 out of 10. I don't think this movie is horrible by any means, and me putting it in last doesn't mean this universe is falling off. I do want to talk about that in detail at the end of this video, but I think this movie actually does its job. It is a prequel that isn't super tedious. I do think this film is overall entertaining. I mean, the concept of watching New York just deteriorate, everything that we set up about this world in the first two movies only makes this prequel even better. But I think there were a few key flaws in making this movie. I think Michael Ceranosky was not the right director to pick for this film. It is obvious that John Krasinski is not behind the camera here, and not in a good way. This is also the director that did Pig, which is very meditative film. And this movie at the end of the day is very meditative. It feels like a very slow burn, just like the other A Quiet Place movies, but those films also have really thrilling sequences. There's maybe one sequence where I was truly on the edge of my seat in this film, and that was the one that took place, a lot of it being in water, which was an environment that we've really never seen in this franchise so far. So that in and of itself made it super unique. Lupita Nyong'o is also amazing in this film. She's no doubt one of the best actresses working today, at least in my opinion, and her eyes alone evoke so much emotion that she truly did carry this film on her back. That's not to say that Joseph Quinn wasn't good. I think he was actually pretty damn great. This is my first time seeing him in anything. I haven't seen Stranger Things, and I've heard of him being in Gladiator 2 and Fantastic Four. So I'm actually very excited to see what he can do in the future, because he wasn't bad here. This movie does on a baseline what all of the other films in this franchise can do. There was just less exciting moments for me personally. Again, not to say this is a bad movie or it wasn't completely necessary. I just think that the people behind this film could have been tweaked a little bit to make this story flourish a little more. And second place for me is A Quiet Place Part 2, coming in at an 8.5 out of 10. Obviously, there's a massive jump between Day 1 and Part 2. And honestly, about a year ago, I probably would have told you that Part 2 was better than Part 1. We'll talk about that in just a second here. For starters, A Quiet Place Part 2 is such a great continuation. Like I said before, at least for me personally, I didn't really expect a sequel in this world, but this is an amazing one at that. Cillian Murphy is a perfect addition, and that sequence where they're running through that little town is brilliant. There are so many standout moments that I just vividly remember watching in a Dolby theater. Also, A Quiet Place Part 2 is my first time going back to the movie theaters after the pandemic, and it's one that'll forever be cemented in my mind. Emily Blunt goes bar for bar with her performance in the first film, and both of the child actors are also great. The story also has a much more confident John Krasinski behind the camera, and you can definitely tell in the best ways possible. This film is way more ambitious, and it's obviously because of the successes of the first movie. It also does keep a decent emotional core that I was really worried about going into the film, because obviously John Krasinski dies at the end of the first film, and that connection with his daughter was one that was an essential part of the Part 1. With that being said, in first place for me is A Quiet Place. This is around a 9 to 9.5 out of 10. This is one of the greatest horror movies of our time, in my opinion. I actually used to think Part 1 and Part 2 could kind of go head to head, but I hadn't seen Part 1 in a while, and I recently rewatched it, and damn is this movie brilliant. I think Day 1 actually builds off of the knowledge we have in A Quiet Place Part 1 so well, but nothing beats out the original. And I'm actually not really a firm believer in that in many franchises other than A Quiet Place, just because they set such a great base, not only for the world, but also on an emotional level. All of the character dynamics are really well shown here, even though this movie isn't super long. And there is just so much riding on the tension of the first few moments of this film that throughout the entirety of the film, you truly do feel scared. And maybe this is just a lapse of memory, but honestly, Part 2 and Day 1, they obviously are very silent, but nothing beats how absolutely quiet and how much minimal dialogue there is in the first film, because Obviously, they have to evolve, and obviously they have to try new things in the latter two films, but this is the core of what this franchise is, and I do think that they can beat out this film in the future, but I think for now, the core is the best, and I think that's what happens when you have a simple story. I do quickly want to talk about the future of this franchise, because I absolutely love this, and I love everything John Krasinski has done with this franchise so far, and we are actually getting an A Quiet Place Part 3 in 2025. In May 2021, Emily Blunt revealed that John Krasinski does have plans for a third installment, and it's going to be the final one in the A Quiet Place trilogy. This doesn't mean they're not going to do series and spin-offs, which I'm assuming they will do. This franchise has been pretty damn successful. But Emily Blunt did state that the Quiet Place movies are intended to be a trilogy after the second film, and they do have more of a story to tell, which is super compelling to me. But the most essential part to this, in my opinion, is since this is the cap to the actual core A Quiet Place trilogy, John Krasinski is returning to direct. And I think this is the key, because honestly, I think the best way to go about this franchise in the future is a series, and I don't think John Krasinski would really be game for directing a series, but he produced this film, and I think at its core, it is still a good A Quiet Place movie. So I think there is a good future here. Obviously, we're getting that third final film in the trilogy. We'll probably get another spin-off movie somewhere down the line, and then I think a series is the way to go. But with that being said, let me know your ranking for the trilogy again in the comments down below, as well as what you think the future of the franchise should be. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Peace.